Let us begin our story in the flat, fertile lowlands of northeastern Arkansas in the early 1930s. An open sky stretches wide and pale over endless rows of cotton, their white bowls soft and silent in the heavy summer air. The Mississippi River runs not far away, a great slow presence that shapes the land and the lives of those who dwell on it. This is Dyess, a modest farming community carved out of swamp and bottomland, a place where days are measured not by clocks, but by sunrise, noon glare, and the long pink fingers of dusk. In one small house, with a tin roof that ticks as it cools at night, a young boy named J.R. Cash opens his eyes to this world. The quiet hours of early morning, before the heat settles in, hold the gentle sounds of a farm waking up, chickens murmuring, a screen door whispering shut, water splashing into a basin. Every object in this simple home has its own humble voice, and every voice will one day echo in the songs he will sing. The family works the land together, their hands moving in familiar rhythms under the beating sun. J.R. Cash walks beside his father and siblings through rows of cotton, the plants low to the ground, the leaves rough to the touch. In the memory of later years, this will not feel like hardship alone, but like a kind of earthy poetry. The sun warms the back of his neck, a dry breeze stirs the dust along the tin rows, and high overhead a single hawk carves slow circles in a faded blue sky. The boy listens. He hears the soft shuffle of feet in the dirt, the distant bark of a dog, the buzz of insects among the blooms. All of it sinks into the deep well of a quiet child, a boy who does not yet know he will grow up to carry these sounds into the wide world. The cotton itself seems to breathe, opening its white fiber like a silent chorus, and the long afternoons drift on as if time itself is made of molasses. Evenings on the farm come gently. As the sun drops below the tree line, a golden light floods the fields, touching the rusted barbed wire and the weathered fence posts with a brief, honeyed glow. The family gathers on the front porch, wooden boards creaking under bare feet, and the cool air finally begins to move. This is the hour of voices, of stories shared in low tones, of laughter that carries no weight. A little radio might be brought outside, its antenna wrapped in tinfoil, pulling faint strains of opera or hymn music from the air. The young boy leans against the porch rail, looking out at the darkening cotton, his mind wandering into a half-dream. He does not know what future awaits him, but the landscape is already shaping his soul, grounding him in something timeless and steady. The simple architecture of the family home, a white clapboard rectangle, a chimney spilling smoke in winter, a rain barrel catching water from the eaves, becomes a quiet landmark in his heart, a place to return to in song and memory. Inside the small house, the rooms are modest but filled with tenderness. The kitchen table is the center of all things, scarred with years of meals, sticky with summer heat. At night, by the low yellow light of an oil lamp, the family reads from the Bible or sings hymns in voices that blend into a gentle weave. J.R.'s mother, Carrie Cash, has a voice that rises sweet and sure above the rest, and her faith wraps the household in something soft but unbreakable. The boy watches her hands as she works, mending clothes, kneading dough, patting his father's shoulder. These quiet domestic scenes are the foundation of a sensibility that will later move millions. In them, there is no pretension, no hurry, just the rhythm of living close to the earth. The smell of wood smoke, the flicker of lamplight on painted walls, the creak of a rocking chair on worn floorboards, every detail is imprinted in his tender mind, waiting to be sung back into existence. He is learning, without knowing it, that music lives in ordinary moments. On Sundays, the family dresses in their best clothes, the stiff cotton starched and smelling of fresh air. They travel in a borrowed truck or a neighbor's automobile to a small wooden church on a dusty road. The building itself is as simple as the faith it shelters, whitewashed and tall-windowed, a steeple pointing toward a vast, cloud-flecked sky. Inside, wooden pews hold the warmth of worshippers, and the air stirs with the scent of hymnals and hand fans. A preacher speaks of hope and redemption while sunlight pours through the glass, splashing amber and rose across the floor. J.R. sits near the window, watching the shifting light, his small legs dangling. The hymns, sung from the heart, rise up with a trembling beauty that makes his chest ache. This is where the deep, resonant voice first hears the power of collective singing, the way a roomful of ordinary people can become something luminous. The memory of that light through the church windows, gold, quiet, full of grace, will stay with him for the rest of his days, a soft flame against the dark. Years pass and the cotton fields roll on. The boy grows tall and lean, his voice deepening like the slow current of the St. Francis River. He absorbs the sorrows and struggles of the farm, the years when floods swallow the crop, the weight of his father's worry, the thin chink of coins on the kitchen counter. Yet what he carries forward is not bitterness, but an ear for the truth of things, a compassion for those who work and wait. He learns that every human being has a story, and that the most beautiful stories often come dressed not in finery, but in work shirts and dusty boots. By the time he is ready to leave Dyess, the world will have planted in him a profound sense of place. He will carry the delta earth on his shoes and the delta sky in his eyes. The cotton fields have done their quiet work, shaping a soul. And when he finally leaves, riding away on a bus that rattles down a two-lane blacktop toward an unknown future, he looks back at the flat horizon and feels not loss, but a deep, abiding peace. The best of that place will always live inside him, like a hush in the center of every song. Imagine, now, that empty cotton field in the late autumn light after the harvest. The bolls are gone, the stalks turning brown and brittle. A thin mist rises from the damp earth at dusk, softening every edge. This is the landscape of his childhood, distilled into a single tranquil image, a long, still field under a lavender sky, the quiet so complete that you can almost hear the earth breathing. Far away, a train sounds its horn, that lonely, searching chord that will one day roll through his music. The boy, now a young man, is no longer there, but the feeling of the place remains, suspended in memory like a note held just before sleep. It is from such peaceful images, rooted in real soil and real seasons, that the voice of Johnny Cash will eventually emerge, a voice that sounds, to so many who hear it, like coming home. And so the first chapter of this story closes in the gentle Arkansas twilight, with nothing but the whisper of the wind and the slow, steady pulse of the land. The journey of a voice almost always begins with an instrument. For J.R. Cash, that instrument arrived with his older brother Jack, who was killed in an accident in the sawmill, leaving behind a hole that would never fully heal. But before that grief, there was music. Rooted in the hard floor of the family home, a small radio set crackled with the sounds of the Grand Ole Opry, and hymns spilled from his mother's lips like cool water. The boy grew up soaking in the Carter family's close harmonies, the plaintive cry of Roy Acuff, and the raw spirituals that lifted him out of himself. Then came the guitar, a simple acoustic, its wood pale and fragrant, its strings tight and silver under his fingers. Learning to press his fingertips to the frets and coax out a true note was a slow, patient act, and J.R. approached it with the same quiet determination he gave the fields. In the evenings, after chores, he would sit at the edge of the porch or on a wooden crate in the yard, the instrument balanced on his knee, and find his way through chords by the sound of the crickets. This was the beginning of a conversation that would last a lifetime, a conversation between a man and his six-string companion, shared under the vast, star-filled canopy of the Arkansas sky. The guitar itself was a humble thing, bought from a catalog or borrowed from a store in town, but in the boy's hands it became a door. As his callous fingers grew stronger, the notes began to ring out clearer, less hesitant. He learned the old songs first, the ones his mother sang, the gospel numbers that moved at a gentle walking pace, built simply on 3 chords and the truth. He discovered that his own voice, already unusually low for his age, could wrap around those melodies like a warm blanket. When he sang, the air around him went quiet. Even the cicadas seemed to pause, as if listening. He wrote his first simple lyrics on a paper sack, words about the river and the rain and the loneliness of a long walk home, and when he whispered them into the strings, something clicked. The music was not separate from his life. It was the very texture of his days, the rhythm of the plow, the melody of the wind, the harmony of a family at rest. This discovery was not a sudden blaze of glory, but a soft dawning, like sunrise finding the mist-covered cotton rows and turning them gold. He was learning to translate the land into sound, to make the ordinary sacred. During the long, humid afternoons, when the sun seemed to stand still, JR would retreat to the shade of a big hickory tree behind the house. There, leaning against the rough bark, he would practice in seclusion, the dappled light falling in shifting coins around him. The tree's canopy was a natural cathedral, its thick leaves rustling with a sound like a faraway river. In this private sanctuary, the boy explored the deeper tones of his own voice, letting it fall into a low register that vibrated through his chest. He found that by dropping his speech almost to a rumble, he could make a simple song feel like a profound secret. This was not theater, but something instinctive, a reaching towards the most honest sound he could make. The heavy Arkansas heat, the flutter of a mockingbird's wings, the distant groan of a tractor, these were his audience. In this way, the iconic vocal timbre that would one day fill concert halls was born not in a studio, but under a tree, with only the warm light and the quiet country for company. It was a voice arriving at its own essential truth, unhurried and unaffected. The influence of radio cannot be overstated. In the evenings, the family would gather around the small wooden box and listen to the staticky magic from Nashville, from Chicago, from the border stations in Mexico that shot a powerful signal into the night. Through that radio, the boy traveled beyond Dyess. He heard the Carter family's songbook, learned the shape of its harmonies, and sensed that in those old songs there was an entire world of mountains and hollers. He heard Jimmy Rogers, the singing brakeman, whose yodel carried a lonesome wanderlust. And he heard black gospel quartets and blues musicians broadcasting from Memphis, their voices saturated with the very soul of the Delta. JR absorbed it all, not separating the styles, but blending them into a river of sound inside his head. Race and genre meant nothing to a child tuned only to feeling. The radio was a warm, crackling fire of music, and he sat close to its glow, night after night, letting the static and song wash over him. These hours of listening became the deep bed of his own musical consciousness, a place where the spiritual met the secular, where the brightness of a morning hymn could coexist with the mournful cry of a blues note. The seeds of his future genre-spanning legacy were planted in those quiet, attentive evenings. When JR was old enough, he began to sing with his siblings at church and at small community gatherings. Their voices, young and earnest, would lift together over the wooden pews or the schoolhouse assembly. These performances were not grand events, but simple offerings, woven into the fabric of farm life. Yet in those moments, the boy felt a new kind of purpose. He noticed the way music could change the light in a room, turning a harsh noon bright into something soft and shimmering. He saw the heads of the old farmers bow, their weathered hands resting on their knees. He saw his mother smile with her eyes closed. He began to understand that a song was a kind of shelter, a place where people could rest their burdens for a while. His own voice, growing deeper and more resonant, added a grounding note to the family blend. It was a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself, steady and true. And when the singing ended and the quiet returned, there remained in the air a delicate warmth, like the afterglow of a setting sun. He had discovered, without fanfare, his calling not to fame or fortune, but to service through sound, to the mending of spirits one note at a time. As he entered his teenage years, the guitar never left his side. It traveled with him on the back of a tractor to the fields, leaning against a fence post while he worked, ready to fill the noon break with a few chords. It lay beside his bed at night, its silent shape a quiet comfort in the darkness. The instrument accumulated scuffs and scratches, a history of its own written in worn wood. He learned to play the rhythm he felt inside, a chugging, train-like beat that mimicked the sound of the old steam engines rolling through the Delta night. That rhythm, sometimes called the boom-chicka-boom, was like a heartbeat, simple and propulsive, connecting the music to the pulse of the land. It would become one of his signatures, but in those early days it was just the natural result of a boy trying to make his guitar sound like the world around him. The freight trains, moving north and south, filled the flat landscape with their lonesome horns, and J.R. answered them with his thumb on the bass string. The night breeze carried the sound away, blending with the frogs and the rustling corn, and the boy felt a deep connection to everything: the steel rails, the dark soil, the infinite stars. Music had become his way of belonging to the universe. Now picture that boy on a quiet evening, sitting on the back steps of the farmhouse with his guitar in his lap. The sky is deepening to a rich indigo, the first stars just beginning to prick the darkness. A single light burns in the kitchen window behind him, casting a soft golden square onto the grass. His long fingers move over the strings without urgency, finding a simple melody, perhaps Rock of Ages, perhaps a new tune of his own. The sound is small, but it seems to fill the entire sky, a gentle murmur against the chorus of crickets. The boy's face is lit from the side by the lamplight, and you can see the quiet focus in his eyes, the hint of a deeper knowing that time will only deepen. He is not dreaming of stadiums or golden records. He is simply present, completely at home, making music because it feels like breathing. This image, quiet and still, holds the essence of a young Johnny Cash before the world knew his name. It is a scene of absolute peace, a single human being in harmony with the night, his soul already singing the songs that will one day travel the globe. And as the notes fade into the darkness, we let that stillness carry us gently forward in his story. The next chapter carries us to Memphis, Tennessee, in the mid-1950s, a city awakening to a new kind of music. The air along Union Avenue hums with possibility, a blend of Delta blues, country twang, and gospel fervor drifting from open doors. A modest storefront at 706 Union carries no great outward sign of the revolution happening inside. This is Sun Records, a former radiator shop turned recording studio, owned by a gentle but determined man with big ears and a belief in raw talent. Johnny Cash, now a young man back from service in the Air Force, walks through that door carrying only his guitar and a handful of songs. He wears simple work clothes, his hair slicked back, his deep eyes holding the memory of cotton rows and starry nights. Inside, the studio is small and acoustically alive, its walls covered in square acoustic tiles, the floor scuffed from countless footsteps. The air smells of coffee, old wood, and electrical hum. Under a single suspended light bulb, Johnny Cash sits down with his guitar and begins to play for Sam Phillips. The sound that comes out is unlike anything heard before: low, steady, and profoundly honest, a voice that seems to emerge from the very core of the American earth. In this tiny, unadorned room, a new chapter of music history begins to unfold, quietly, almost reverently. The recording sessions at Sun were simple affairs, bathed in a warm, amber glow that has since become legendary. Johnny Cash brought the boom-chicka-boom rhythm he had perfected in his boyhood, and Sam Phillips paired him with guitarist Luther Perkins and bassist Marshall Grant, two men who were not polished musicians but who understood the power of space and restraint. Their sound was lean, almost sparse, just a Martin guitar, a simple electric, and a stand-up bass walking delicately along the spine of the melody. When they played Hey Porter, the first single, the room filled with a gentle but insistent groove, the kind that makes your shoulders sway involuntarily. The tape machine rolled faithfully, capturing not just notes, but the very air of the moment, the slight creak of a chair, the click of a guitar pick against wood, the soft breath of a vocalist leaning into the microphone. The overall feeling was one of discovery, not performance. In that studio, under the low ceiling, surrounded by the hum of transformers and the patient gaze of Sam Phillips, Johnny Cash became a recording artist. It happened not with a spectacle, but with the quiet concentration of someone writing a letter to the world, a letter that simply said, "Here I am. This is what I have to say." The atmosphere inside that tiny studio was one of deep mutual respect and unspoken comradeship. Luther Perkins, shy and slender, would sit perched on a stool, his fingers moving with a careful, economical grace that gave each note room to breathe. Marshall Grant kept the bass thumping like a distant heart, never rushing, never showing off. And at the center was Johnny Cash, his voice already settling into that deep, resonant register that would define his legend. He sang with his eyes often closed, as if conjuring images of the flatlands and rivers he had left behind. The songs themselves were deceptively simple tales of trains, faith, love, and the ache of loneliness, but the delivery carried an immense weight. Sam Phillips knew he had found something rare, something that could speak across the boundaries of radio formats and regional tastes. He leaned back in his chair, a satisfied half-smile on his face, and let the music play long. The control booth window, a small rectangle of glass, framed these sessions like a painting. The band clustered in the soft light, shadows pooling around their feet, the glowing tubes of the mixing console creating a constellation of tiny orange lights. It was a sacred space, a chapel of sound, and the music made there still resonates like a prayer. As the singles began to roll out Cry, 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 I Walk the Line, Folsom Prison Blues, the world on the other side of that studio door started to notice. But within the walls of Sun Records, the focus remained on the music itself, not the noise of fame. Johnny Cash returned session after session, bringing new lyrics scribbled on napkins and legal pads, his voice growing ever more assured. The sound of his voice was matched by the steady, unflashy beauty of the Tennessee Three, and together they created a body of work that felt timeless from its first breath. The studio itself took on the character of a trusted friend, the worn oriental rug on the floor, the battered piano in the corner, the single window with its view of the quiet back alley. Each element contributed to a sense of sanctuary, a place where the outside world faded and only the music existed. Even the late-night sessions, stretching into the early morning hours, were filled with a sleepy intimacy. They would take breaks to drink cold Cokes and listen to playback, the reels spinning slowly, the muffled music filling the room with a ghostly presence. In that haze of exhaustion and creativity, Johnny Cash was forging not just songs, but a life's work, one honest note at a time. Consider the specific magic of that voice. When he stepped up to the microphone, he did not belt or croon. He simply spoke the truth in a low, rumbling tone that seemed to vibrate in your chest. The microphone, a heavy ribbon microphone from the era, picked up every nuance, the rasp of a breath, the natural grain of a man who had known hard labor and long nights. It was a voice that sounded like the land itself, like the slow drift of the Mississippi or the creak of an old barn door. In I Walk the Line, that steady mantra of fidelity, each note was placed with the deliberate care of someone stepping across a narrow beam. The bass notes of his guitar followed his voice like a shadow, and the whole production remained eerily quiet and warm, a perfect bed for the honesty of his pledge. Outside the studio, Memphis buzzed with the early sounds of rock and roll, but inside Sun, Johnny Cash was carving his own path, one that was reverent, reflective, and deeply rooted. There was a serenity in his work, even when the lyrics spoke of imprisonment or loss. The serenity came from his unwavering commitment to authenticity, to never singing a word he didn't feel. This quiet artistic integrity became the foundation of his enduring appeal, a steady beacon in a changing world. During those golden years at Sun, Johnny Cash also began to craft the visual person that would later become his trademark, but inside the studio, all was focused on the sonic. The room's peculiar acoustics, a happy accident of its former life, gave his recordings a distinctive slapback echo that became an audible signature. It was as if the very walls were singing back to him, a ghostly reply that added depth and mystery to his voice. The musicians learned to play to that echo, timing their notes so that the natural reverb of the room became a fourth member of the band. In the late hours, with the street outside empty and the city asleep, they would cut take after take, each one a little more relaxed, a little more transcendent. Sam Phillips would capture it on tape with a craftsman's care, then sit back and listen with the lights dimmed, a cigarette trailing a thin ribbon of smoke. There was no rush to become something more. The creative process itself was the reward. The result was a catalog of early recordings that still possess a raw, luminous quality, like looking through an old window pane at a distant, sunlit field. They are records not just of songs, but of a specific place and time, a peaceful cocoon of creativity that the world would soon tear open, but that would never entirely be lost. Eventually, The demands of a growing career would pull Johnny Cash away from the security of Sun Records and into larger studios and bigger stages. But the spirit of those early Memphis days never left him. Whenever he spoke of them in later years, his voice would soften, becoming almost reverent. He would recall the taste of stale coffee from the machine in the corner, the way the morning light would slant through the front window and lay a golden blanket over the worn floorboards, the feel of his Martin guitar vibrating gently against his chest. Those memories were a kind of talisman, reminders of a time when music was purely a matter of the heart, untouched by the machinery of celebrity. And so the image we hold, as we drift deeper into his story, is that of the quiet young man in the simple suits, sitting under the warm glow of the Sun studio lights, his fingers strumming without pretense, his voice dropping to a low rumble of devotion. Outside, the world rushed on, but in this recollection, all is stillness. The tape reels turn slowly. The echo trails off into silence. And Johnny Cash smiles, a barely perceptible curve of his lip, as the last chord fades. This is the sacred heart of his musical genesis, a gentle fire that would keep him warm for decades to come.